Oh, here she is. Okay, perfect. Here comes one of the producers.
Late as usual.
Great. Have a seat, the hot seat. First of all, can we have a big round of applause for actually making something very complicated, very heated, both a worthwhile discussion that almost anybody could understand the complexity of it. So Paul Wagner, the director, Jenny Mead, producer, Bobby Varma, and Ed Freeman participated in this from University of Virginia Darden School of Business. I will say that Scott Beardsley is here in the audience. Yep, here he is right here. Scott, you want to take a step up? He was in the, turn around and they can see you. He is the Dean of the Darden School of Business and was also featured in the film. I'm Margaret Franklin, CEO of CFA Institute, and we are thrilled to have sponsored this film. We're going to take a time for about 20 minutes of questions, but before we begin, Paul asked for a few minutes to recognize all those who are in the audience who've actually helped make the film. These things are always a labor of love, and certainly many hands are involved in it. So, Paul, do you want to maybe take a few minutes?
Yeah, obviously the film was made here in Charlottesville, and we're fortunate to have worked with some terrific filmmakers based in Charlottesville. A lady named Ellen Wagner, let's say. Oh yes, my wife, associate producer. The director of photography for the film, Eric Hurt. Eric. The gaffer, lighting director for the film, Jason Mitchell, is here. I can't see the lights. The editor, who worked with me over a long time on the film, Anne DeCorte. And the really talented artist who created the animations for us, Jonah Tobias. Thanks to all of them. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. So we're going to start with a few questions. At CFA Institute, for those of you who don't know what we do, we offer the Charter Financial Analyst designation. The charter holders espouse professional excellence, ethics, and education for the ultimate benefit of society in leading the investment management industry. We have 177,000 members and 350,000 candidates around the world write the CFA charter. So for us, this was an incredibly important film to support. At a time when actually we see that polar extreme with regards to the purpose of capitalism and the distribution of the spoils. So let me start by asking the question, and Ed, maybe we'll start with you. Are corporations inherently greedy at this point in time where short-termism still is rampant? Is capitalism inherently corrupt by the nature, for instance, of the incentive schemes?
I think the answer to that's absolutely not. We're in the grip of this old story that business sucks. It doesn't. It makes us and our world better for the most part. We have to understand that every business has always created value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and people with the money. And for every scandal like Enron or the others in the film, there are 10,000 business people out just trying to do the right thing. We need a story that we can enact that celebrates that gets us out of this idea that business is somehow amoral or immoral. I think a number of people in the film made it pretty clear, if you just focus on the short term, even regardless of what you say, if that's all you focus on, you just won't do very well. So I think the actions of business and the story that we tell, there's a disconnect here. And what I think we've tried to do is correct that disconnect and make it possible for businesses to live up to it. More and more companies are embracing this idea. So I'm actually very optimistic about the future of business.
May I just add to that? Asking the question about whether organizations, corporations, or capitalism is inherently corrupt is like asking, are people inherently corrupt? It ultimately comes down to how we choose to behave, what are the situations and contexts that we operate in, and the choices that we make. I think the idea behind the film is that we all have choices to make. Are there business leaders and companies that have made terrible choices? Absolutely. But should we reduce the institution of business to them? I hope not. Because if we want to create a better world, we need to aspire to something larger.
Paul, you have done several documentaries. You're an Oscar winner. What propelled you to do this particular theme, because it's different than your others?
Well, mainly because I had the opportunity to collaborate with some tremendous people, and people who've become tremendous friends, particularly Jenny and Bobby and Ed. A lot of people here have seen others of my films, and I just wanted to kind of connect, because when I first talked to Bobby and Jenny about the film, the idea of the film, I thought, I don't know, that doesn't really sound like my kind of film. I've made a lot of films about American history, American cultural subjects, cultural history, art, anthropology, and I thought, I don't even know anything about business. Luckily, they were very patient with me. We spent quite a while, before we even got the camera out, for me to learn a lot. We did a lot of research together and writing together. And one of the things, stemming from Ed's work, and that I learned from Bobby and Jenny, is that this was going to be a film about culture. It was going to be a film about people in corporations. And it wasn't going to be that different from the other films that I've made about culture, because it's going to be about values, what people value in their lives, what they value in their institutions and organizations. And so once I kind of got over that and understood more what the film could be and should be about, then I felt very at home with it as a filmmaker and as a storyteller.
Yeah, it was wonderful working with Paul. I've known Paul now for 20-some years and always really wanted to work with him. So I was really glad that we had an opportunity to kind of lure him into our world. So it was really fun. I just want to make one point too regarding your first question. It was really interesting. When we were wrapping up the film, the Business Roundtable came out with its. For those who don't know, that's an alliance of large businesses or businesses just in the U.S., right? Came out with the basic idea that's espoused in our movie that, businesses and companies need to pay attention to all stakeholders. It was a little too late. I think we were locked and ready to screen the film when that came out, so it's not included. But that was very heartening to see such a large alliance come out with that message.
So let's just pick up on that a little bit, because the last time it came out was 1981 or 1983, and it espoused many of the same virtues that this one hopes to achieve, and yet that really launched a period of hyper capitalism, and really for the corporation, not for communities and the various stakeholders. So you'll probably be well aware that there's a fair bit of concern that it's a political or a reputational greenwashing type play, rather than a serious and concerted discussion to reconsider the purpose of the corporation. So I'm going to hand the mic over to the two of you to enlighten us on that.
Well, I think it certainly could be. And in line with my previous comments, really this comes down to how people and organizations act. Are we paying employees more? Are we taking care of the environment? So whether it is kind of, just words on a wall depends on how people behave. There might be, and I think we should fully expect that several companies will treat it as such. But we should also hold out the hope and support companies that try to do more than just make it words on the wall, that actually try to take care of their employees, invest in their communities. It's not a foregone conclusion that companies will just treat it as marketing.
Well, I would just add a couple of more things with the roundtable statement. Of course, nobody's going to be perfect here. If we're in the grip of the old story, we won't allow anybody to even be good. We'll see them as, hey, these are business people, they're greedy, they suck. And that'll be too bad if that's what happens. There's no going back to pre-2008. There's just no going back. There's something called the Principles for Responsible Investment that banks have signed. Those principles essentially say you need to take a stakeholder approach, a more long-term approach. And of the banks that have signed that, they have $70 trillion under management. So even Wall Street is figuring this out. Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock Investment, one of the largest, in a letter to CEOs, says essentially you need to have a purpose of how you're making society better, and you need to pay attention to stakeholders. I think, you know, those things together say there's no going back. And let me just say for sure, I got way too much credit for that in the film, and I object to that. There have been hundreds of people that have worked on this stakeholder idea for a very long time, and I think eventually we have a language, and I don't mean just a language. Language refers to our actions as well. That will help us be the generation that makes business better. And that's what we have to do. That's certainly what we're trying to do at the Darden School. And more schools are actually doing that. So again, I may be the optimist here. I don't know. Even though for 40 years nobody cared.
I would just say, I think the film, irrespective of the fact that it might have come out right before the statement, there's an interesting movement of asset owners. Those are the world's largest pension plans and sovereign wealth funds who are paying particular attention to that long-term view because they have inherently, they're recipients of those long-term outcomes. So I think there's that combined with a new generation. Scott Beardsley and I had the opportunity to meet a couple of weeks ago when I first arrived here in Charlottesville, and I was enormously heartened by the tenor and attitude of students that are coming through Darden and through other business schools that take those responsibilities very, very seriously. So I think, Paul, let's sort of go back to your original comment that you saw this as a cultural moment, not just a specific esoteric look into business. And maybe you just might want to comment what else you see going on that you think there might be just enough of a centrifugal force that helps us make really this time different than others.
Sure. You know, ultimately, these films are always personal. Ellen and I have 4 kids, 4 millennial kids, and I can just see in their attitudes and their take on business how things are changing, and the ways and things might change, and hopefully will change. You know, in working on the film, we often said, well, we want to spotlight millennials and the hope there, but it's also other business leaders. You know, some of them that we spotlighted in the film, and others of all ages. But I do think, for whatever reasons, internet or name your possible reason, that there is a millennial generation that is going to demand some of these changes and has full expectations that corporations, business in general, will conduct themselves at a higher moral level than has been the case for the last 40 years.
Great. One sort of final thought before I give you a question for the entire panel is what I loved about this film was it's completely accessible. It's actually very engaging and entertaining. I thought you had some quite priceless lines, which you have up here, so good on you for the humor in it all. What's your plans to actually distribute this more widely? And because it wasn't just left or right side, it was, I thought, a very balanced perspective.
Right. Well, one of the ideas, you know, when we first started talking about the film was, and I think Bobby sort of suggested this earlier, to kind of take these ideas that have been sort of academic, I'll put quotation marks around that, and take them to a broader audience. an audience like this, and even broader in terms of interest in these subjects. And you know, I think that's the larger goal for the film and for its distribution. We're just now starting to think about the specific distribution plans for the film, but one of the ideas certainly would be, you know, public television broadcast, but also to take, but also to do some premieres in Washington, D.C., in New York, maybe San Francisco, bringing in the political community. We think the time is right. I alluded to sort of the millennial generation, but I think this year is an important year for this film to be released, and I'm really thrilled with the timing that we're looking at. The ideas are out there. I can't tell you how many times over the last year or so I've gotten up, you know, early in the morning and sent an email to Bobby and Jenny and Ed. Oh my God, did you see the article in Forbes? They're like quoting from our film, you know. It's just, you just have the sense that these ideas are out there, and I think the timing for the release of the film really couldn't be better.
I just want to say, regarding Ed's lines in the movie, I've heard these lines now probably maybe almost 100 times. I still laugh at the lines. But I just wanted to add, you know, the idea for this documentary kind of came about, you know, in the academic world. There's a lot of conversation among academics at conferences and in journals, et cetera, and we were having a stakeholder conference a couple of years ago, and Bobby, I think, said, you know, I would love it if this conversation could go beyond the academic circles, and so that was really the, you know, our goal for it. And I can't tell you how many of my friends have what Ed calls the business sucks story. And so I'm glad to see some of you business sucks people are here in the audience. But so part of the goal for me was, yes, expanding the audience and just letting people know that there's a different way to look at business. So.
Just a quick word on that as well. You know, many other documentary films that are very popular that get us excited or angry, the villain of these films is always a corporation. Right? Pick your favorite issue. It can be sustainability, it can be animal rights, it can be, you know, income inequality, all things that we should care deeply about, and corporations have a huge role to play in either furthering that problem or being a force for a solution in those issues. And so we can't make progress on those other issues if we don't tackle this one thing that kind of holds them all together. And as esoteric and as academic as it is, the goal for any film is to promote conversation, right? You don't have to agree with the viewpoint in the film, but I do hope as a part of a functioning democracy, you consider what you believe and why you believe it. I think ultimately that is the biggest win for us, is that we can promote people who might disagree fundamentally with the views that are portrayed in the film to think critically about what they believe and why.
Okay, last question. This is for everybody on the panel. I'm going to assume you're all optimistic. So let's go wildly optimistic, mildly optimistic, or plain old optimistic in 2 or 3 words. Why?
Almost wildly optimistic. There's too much crap going on now that could slow stuff down. But I think your 4 millennials, Maureen's of mine 3, the others, they're going to demand this. There's no going back. So I think we're on the edge of really a very, very flowering of a new industrial age.
Optimistic, and optimistic for slightly different reasons. There are fewer places to hide in the digital age. You know, with websites like Glassdoor.com, you can't hide the fact that you might have a toxic culture. Information gets out very quickly, and so companies are catching on and saying, look, we can't handle this kind of downside risk. We better have great practices, because that's what attracts and retains top talent.
I'm optimistic, and part of that is just seeing what now appears in the media, advocating a more conscious approach to business. The millennials, So I'll fall in, okay, I'll be mildly optimistic.
Yeah, I guess when I think about this, I think I have to be optimistic because the alternatives are so bad. And I mean that sincerely. It's a joke, but it's not a joke. You know, if we don't solve it, we are in deep, you know what, as a society, as a democracy. This is not just about the economy.
This is a really, really important film. So let me, as CEO of CFA Institute, give you my commitment that we will help with the distribution of this, that we will find audiences globally. We are very aligned on purposeful capitalism. We are very aligned on the purpose of corporations, which make a big difference to our future health and benefit collectively. And so, really, it just hats off to you. One more round of applause for this film.